Theo Bastian heard the melody for the first time on a Tuesday morning in September, drifting through the open window of his grandmother's nursing home room. He'd been visiting Graham every week for 3 years, ever since Alzheimer's had stolen most of her memories and left her in Seattle Grace memory care. At 92, she barely recognized him anymore. Some days she thought he was her brother. Some days she thought he was a stranger. Some days she just hummed and stared out the window. Today was a humming day. But the melody wasn't coming from Graham. It was coming from somewhere outside. A simple, haunting tune played on what sounded like a violin. 4 measures, repeated over and over. Not quite a song, more like a fragment. A musical question without an answer. Theo stood and looked out the window. In the courtyard below, a teenage girl sat on a bench with a violin, playing the same 4 measures again and again. She looked about 16 with dark hair in a messy bun and the kind of intense focus that comes from searching for something just out of reach. She'd play the 4 measures, stop, write something in a notebook, then try again with slight variations. She was composing, Theo realized, or trying to, stuck on those 4 measures and unable to move forward. From the bed, Graham began to hum along. Theo turned, startled. Graham was sitting up now, her eyes clearer than they'd been in months. She hummed the melody perfectly. Not just the 4 measures the girl was playing, but what came next. 8 more measures. A beautiful continuation that transformed the fragment into something complete. Graham? Theo moved to her side. How do you know that song? She looked at him confused. What song, dear? The one you just hummed. The melody from outside. I don't know what you mean. And just like that, the clarity was gone. Her eyes went distant again. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling. But Theo had heard it. Graham had hummed a melody that the girl outside didn't know yet. A completion to a fragment. He looked out the window again. The girl had stopped playing and was staring at her notebook in frustration. She packed up her violin and walked away, the question still unanswered. Theo pulled out his phone and hummed Graham's continuation into a voice memo. He wasn't musical. He worked as an accountant, dealt in numbers, not notes. But he knew he'd heard something important, something that connected his disappearing grandmother to a frustrated teenage violinist in ways he didn't understand. He needed to find that girl. It took Theo 3 days to track down the violinist. He started by asking at the nursing home. Did anyone know a teenage girl who sometimes played violin in the courtyard? The receptionist remembered seeing her but didn't know her name. She plays every few days, usually around lunch. Very talented. Theo came back at lunchtime the next day and waited. No violinist. He tried again the day after. Still nothing. On the 3rd day, he brought his laptop to the courtyard and worked remotely, determined to catch her if she appeared. At 1:30 p.m., she walked through the garden gate, carrying her violin case. Theo watched as she settled on the same bench and pulled out her violin. She played the same 4 measures, the fragment that had haunted him for 3 days, and stopped in frustration. "Excuse me," Theo called out, walking toward her. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I heard you playing earlier this week. That melody you're working on." The girl looked up, wary. "And?" My grandmother, she's a patient here. She knows the rest of it. She hummed it when she heard you playing. The girl's eyes widened. She knows the continuation? How? I just composed this last week. I haven't played it for anyone. I don't know how she knows it, Theo admitted. She has Alzheimer's. Most days she doesn't know who I am. But when she heard your melody, she hummed What Comes Next. I recorded it. He pulled out his phone. Can I play it for you? The girl nodded, her violin forgotten. Theo played the voice memo. Graham's voice, thin and wavering, but absolutely certain, hummed the 4 measures the girl had been playing, then continued with 8 more measures that completed the thought. It was beautiful, haunting and perfect, and exactly what the fragment needed. The girl's hands started shaking. That's it. That's exactly what I've been searching for. I've been stuck on those 4 measures for 2 weeks, trying hundreds of variations, and nothing felt right. But this is perfect. How does she know it? I don't know, Theo said. But I'd like to find out. I'm Theo, by the way, Theo Bastion. Lily Chen, the girl said absently, already scribbling in her notebook. Can you play that again? I need to write it down. Theo played the recording 3 more times while Lily frantically transcribed the melody. Then she picked up her violin and played it, all 12 measures together. The fragment and its completion united at last. It sounded like coming home, like a question finally answered, like something lost being found. I need to meet her, Lily said. Your grandmother. I need to understand how she knew this. She might not remember, Theo warned. She might not even recognize that she hummed it. Alzheimer's is unpredictable. I don't care. I need to try. They walked into the nursing home together. Graham was in her room, staring out the window. When Theo entered, she looked at him blankly. Graham, this is Lily. She's a violinist. She was hoping you could help her with a melody. Graham's expression didn't change. I don't know any melodies, dear. Lily sat down and very gently began to play the 4 measures, her original fragment. Graham's eyes focused. Her hands began to move slightly, as if conducting. And then very softly, she began to hum the continuation. Lily played along, following Graham's humming, and together they completed the melody. 12 measures of perfect, heartbreaking music. When they finished, Lily had tears streaming down her face. Where did you learn that? Who taught you? Graham looked confused. Learn what, dear? The melody, the one you just hummed. I don't know any melodies. Lily looked at Theo desperately. She has to know something. Music like that doesn't just appear in someone's mind. It has history. It has a source. Theo thought for a moment. Graham, do you remember being a little girl? Do you remember music from when you were young? Something flickered in Graham's eyes. My mother sang to me. Beautiful songs. In the old language. What old language? Lily asked softly. Japanese. We spoke Japanese at home. Before the war, before everything changed. Theo knew this part of his grandmother's history. She'd been born in Seattle in 1932, the daughter of Japanese immigrants. In 1942, at age 10, she and her family had been forced into an internment camp for the duration of World War II. They'd lost everything. Their home, their business, their community. Graham, Theo said gently, do you remember the camp? Where you lived during the war? Graham's face clouded. I don't like to remember that place. I know. But did your mother sing to you there? Did she sing the songs in Japanese? She sang to keep us from being afraid. She sang to remember home. She sang... Graham's voice drifted off. Lily was writing frantically in her notebook. Mr. Bastian... Theo, please. Theo, I think this melody might be from the internment camps. I think your grandmother learned it when she was a child, and it's been buried in her memory for 80 years. But when she heard me playing something similar, it triggered the memory. Even though she's forgotten so much else, the music remained. Theo felt chills run down his spine. You mean this could be a song from 1942? From one of the camps? Or earlier, it could be a traditional Japanese melody her mother knew, or something composed in the camp. Music was one of the few things people had there. They couldn't take away songs. Lily looked at Graham with wonder. She's carrying a piece of history that might have been lost forever. How do we find out? Theo asked. How do we know what this melody is, where it came from? Lily thought for a moment. My grandmother is a music historian. She specializes in Asian American musical traditions, including songs from the internment camps. If anyone would know, it's her. Can I record your grandmother humming this? I want to play it for my grandmother. They spent the next hour in Graham's room. Lily would play the 4 measures on her violin, and Graham would hum the continuation. They recorded it multiple times. Sometimes Graham would hum it exactly the same way. Sometimes she'd add small variations, grace notes, subtle shifts in tempo, as if accessing different memories of the same song. Finally exhausted, Graham fell asleep in her chair. Thank you, Lily whispered to Theo. This is the most important thing I've ever discovered. I came here trying to finish a composition for my music school audition. I found a piece of living history instead. Will you let me know what your grandmother says? Theo asked. I want to understand this too. I want to know what Graham is carrying in her memory. Lily pulled out her phone. Give me your number. I'll call you as soon as I know anything. Lily called Theo the next evening, her voice vibrating with excitement. My grandmother recognized it. Not the exact melody, but the style. It's definitely from the camps. Probably from Minidoka in Idaho. That's where Seattle Japanese families were sent. She thinks it might be a lullaby based on the structure. But she'd never heard this specific version before. So it might be original? Theo asked. Something composed in the camp? Maybe? Or maybe it's a variation on a traditional song that got changed over time. My grandmother wants to meet your grandmother. She thinks if they talk, if your grandmother hears someone speaking Japanese, singing other songs from that era, it might trigger more memories. Would that be okay? Of course, Theo said immediately. When? They arranged to meet at the nursing home the following Saturday. Lily brought her grandmother, Dr. Susan Chen, a petite woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. Dr. Chen bowed slightly to Graham and spoke in Japanese. Graham's face transformed. She smiled. A real smile, the first Theo had seen in months, and responded in halting Japanese. They talked for several minutes, Graham's Japanese rusty but growing stronger as the conversation continued. Dr. Chen sang a traditional Japanese lullaby. Graham joined in on the second verse, her voice thin but true. Then Dr. Chen hummed the melody from Lily's recording. Graham's eyes filled with tears. She began to speak in Japanese, rapid and urgent. Dr. Chen listened intently, occasionally asking questions, her own eyes growing wet. Finally, Graham fell silent and closed her eyes, exhausted. Dr. Chen turned to Theo and Lily. She remembers. The melody is called Kaerimichi, The Way Home. Her mother composed it in Minidoka in 1943. They'd been in the camp for a year, and her mother was trying to teach the children not to forget where they came from, even though home was gone. The song was about carrying home in your heart when you can't carry it in your hands. Theo felt his throat tighten. My great-grandmother composed this? Yes. Your grandmother says her mother sang it every night in the barracks, taught it to all the children there. But after the war, after they were released, no one wanted to remember the camps. The songs were forgotten. Most people tried to move forward, to assimilate, to forget the trauma. The music disappeared. Dr. Chen pulled out a folder. I've been researching music from the internment camps for 20 years. I found hundreds of songs. Through interviews with survivors, old recordings, written accounts. But this one was new. Your grandmother might be one of the last people alive who remembers it. She looked at Graham, who was dozing in her chair. Your great-grandmother created something beautiful in a place designed to break people's spirits. She gave children hope through music. And now, 80 years later, that music is being rediscovered because your grandmother's memory preserved it, even when so much else was lost. Lily was quietly crying. I can't believe I stumbled into this. I was just trying to finish a composition for my audition, and instead I found... She gestured helplessly. You found what music is supposed to do, Dr. Chen said gently. Connect us across time, across cultures, across generations. This melody lived in your grandmother's mind for 80 years. She nodded at Graham. Oh, waiting to be heard again? And it called out to you? She looked at Lily. Because you were playing something that resonated with it. That's not coincidence. That's music recognizing itself. Theo looked at his grandmother, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. What do we do now? How do we honor this? Dr. Chen smiled. We record it properly, we preserve it, we share it. And Lily, if you're willing, you complete your composition using Kaerimichi as the foundation. You take this melody from 1943 and bring it into 2024. You show that the music your great-great-grandmother created still has power, still has meaning, still connects us. Over the next 3 months, Lily worked on the most important composition of her young life. She visited Graham twice a week, sometimes with Theo, sometimes alone. She'd play her violin and Graham would hum, not just Kaerimichi, but other melodies from her childhood, fragments of songs long forgotten. Lily recorded everything. Dr. Chen helped research the historical context. She found records from Minidoka showing that Theo's great-grandmother, Hanako Bastion, née Yamamoto, had been a music teacher before the war. In the camp, she'd taught children to sing, using music as a way to maintain cultural identity and emotional resilience. Your great-grandmother was remarkable, Dr. Chen told Theo during one research session. I found accounts from other survivors who remembered her. She organized concerts in the camp, taught traditional songs, composed new ones that blended Japanese and American musical traditions. She was trying to create a bridge, helping children honor their heritage while preparing them for a future in America. Theo learned more about his family history in those 3 months than he'd learned in his entire life. His grandmother had rarely spoken about the camps, about the trauma of being imprisoned in her own country because of her ethnicity. The family had buried that history, moved forward, assimilated. But the music remained, buried in Graham's failing memory, waiting for someone to recognize it. Lily's composition grew. She started with Kaerimichi, the 12 measures that Graham had preserved. Then she built around it, creating variations that reflected the journey of Japanese Americans from immigration to internment to eventual integration. The music was sometimes mournful, sometimes hopeful, sometimes angry, always beautiful. She called it Songs My Great-Great-Grandmother Taught Me Through a Stranger's Grandmother. The title was unwieldy, but accurate. In December, Lily performed it for her music school audition. She played the entire 20-minute piece for a panel of judges at the prestigious Berklee College of Music, where she hoped to study composition. She prefaced the performance by telling Graham's story about an elderly woman with Alzheimer's who had preserved a melody from an internment camp for 80 years, about how that melody had completed Lily's fragment, about how music connects us across generations, across trauma, across time. Then she played. The judges sat in silence for a full minute after she finished. Finally, the head of the composition department spoke. "Miss Chen, in 30 years of teaching, I've never heard anything quite like this. The technical skill is impressive, but more than that, you've created something that honors history while making it living and relevant. You've given voice to people who were silenced. That's what great art does." Lily was accepted to Berklee with a full scholarship, but before she left Seattle for Boston, she had one more performance to give. On a rainy Saturday in March, Seattle Grace Memory Care held a special concert in their activities room. Lily had organized everything. She'd invited other musicians, a pianist, a cellist, a flutist, all students from her high school. She'd invited Dr. Chen to speak about the historical significance of music from the internment camps. She'd invited nursing home residents and their families. And most importantly, she'd arranged for Graham to be in the front row. Theo sat beside his grandmother, holding her hand. She was having a good day. Not entirely lucid, but present enough to recognize that something important was happening. Dr. Chen spoke first, giving a brief history of the Japanese internment and the role music played in the camps. She explained how art and culture became resistance, how songs preserved identity when everything else was being stripped away. Then Lily and her ensemble performed Songs My Great-Great-Grandmother Taught Me. As the music filled the room, Theo watched his grandmother's face. She was listening intently, her eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. Her hand moved slightly, as if conducting. When the piece reached the Kaerimichi section, when Lily played the melody that Graham had hummed that first day, Graham opened her eyes. She began to sing along softly in Japanese. The words came back to her, words she hadn't spoken in 80 years. Uchi wa kokoro no naka ni / home is in the heart / wasurerarenai / never forgotten / Kaerimichi wa tsuzuku / the way home continues. Others in the audience noticed. A few other Japanese American elders, some who'd been in different camps, Some too young to remember, but who'd heard their parents' stories, joined in. Their voices were fragile but determined, remembering words their community had tried to forget. By the end of the performance, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, people approached Lily in tears, thanking her. An elderly man in a wheelchair introduced himself as a Minidoka survivor. "I was 7 years old in the camp," he said. "I remember Hanako Yamamoto, your great-great-grandmother." He nodded at Theo. "She taught me to sing. I haven't thought about her in 70 years. But hearing that music, I remembered. Thank you for bringing that back." A woman in her 60s approached Theo. "I'm a third-generation Japanese American. My grandparents were in Manzanar. They never talked about it, never taught us the language or the songs or any of it. They wanted us to be American, to forget. And now I realize how much we lost by forgetting. Thank you for helping us remember." Lily gave Theo and Graham a CD recording of the performance. "This is for you, so you can play it whenever you want, so Graham can hear it and remember." Graham held the CD with shaking hands. For a moment, her eyes were perfectly clear. She looked at Lily and said in English, "My mother would be proud. You made her music live again." Then the clarity faded, but the smile remained. Theo's grandmother passed away 6 months later, peacefully in her sleep. At the funeral, Lily performed Kaerimichi, just the original 12 measures, simple and pure. It was what Graham would have wanted. After the service, dozens of people approached Theo with stories he'd never heard. Former students of his great-grandmother, now in their 80s and 90s, who remembered her teaching music in the camp. Children of survivors who'd heard their parents hum fragments of camp songs and never knew what they were. Younger Japanese Americans who'd been moved by Lily's composition and had started researching their own family histories. "Your grandmother preserved something important," one elderly woman told Theo. "Not just a melody, but a memory, a piece of our history that almost disappeared. Thank you for helping bring it back." Theo realized that Graham's struggle with Alzheimer's had, in a strange way, been a gift. As her recent memories faded, her oldest memories had become more accessible. The music from her childhood, buried for 8 decades, had surfaced when everything else was falling away. She'd been a keeper of history without knowing it. And through Lily, that history had been saved. After the funeral, Theo and Lily started a project together. They called it the Song Catchers, a database and archive of music from the Japanese American internment camps. Dr. Chen led the research, interviewing survivors and their descendants, collecting recordings and written accounts of songs that had been created or preserved during internment. Lily, now studying composition at Berkeley, used the collected melodies as foundations for new works. Each piece honored the original while bringing it into contemporary context, showing that these songs still had relevance, still had power. The Songcatchers archive grew quickly. People across the country contributed, sharing songs their grandparents had hummed, sending old recordings, writing down melodies they half remembered from childhood. Within 2 years, they'd collected over 200 songs. Some were traditional Japanese melodies. Some were American folk songs adapted with Japanese lyrics. Some were original compositions created in the camps. Music born from suffering but expressing hope. Theo quit his accounting job to run the project full-time. It wasn't lucrative, but it was meaningful. He'd spent his career dealing with numbers, with concrete and quantifiable things. Now he dealt with memory, with music, with the preservation of stories that had almost been lost. He thought about Graham often, about how she'd spent her life trying to forget the camps, trying to move forward, trying to be American enough that people wouldn't see her as different. And yet the music had remained, buried in her mind, waiting to be heard again. She'd carried Kaerimichi the way home for 80 years, and in the end, that song had brought Theo home too, home to his family history, home to a purpose he'd never known he needed, home to himself. 3 years after Graham's death, Songs My Great-Great-Grandmother Taught Me won the BMI Student Composer Award. Lily, now 20 years old and a rising star in contemporary classical music, dedicated the award to Hanako Yamamoto and to all the artists who'd created beauty in the midst of injustice. Her acceptance speech went viral. Thousands of people shared it, discussing the importance of preserving difficult histories, of honoring the resistance and resilience of marginalized communities, of listening to the songs our elders carry. The Song Catchers Project received national attention. Funding arrived. They expanded, creating similar archives for other communities whose musical traditions had been suppressed or forgotten. Music from other internment camps, from indigenous boarding schools, from enslaved communities, from immigrant groups who'd been pressured to assimilate and abandon their cultures. Music, Theo learned, was a form of memory more persistent than words. You could forget names, dates, faces, but a melody heard in childhood could lie dormant for 80 years and still emerge perfect when the right moment came. Songs were time capsules. Songs were resistance. Songs were home when home had been taken away. 10 years after finding the first fragment of Kaerimichi, Theo stood in the Seattle Asian Art Museum at the opening of an exhibition called Songs from the Camps, Music as Resistance in Japanese American Internment Centers. The exhibition featured photographs, documents, and recordings from the Song Catchers archive. Visitors could listen to dozens of songs through headphones at listening stations. They could read the stories of the people who'd composed, taught, and preserved these melodies. And in the center of the main gallery was a video installation. Graham recorded during one of Lily's visits, humming Kaerimichi while looking out her nursing home window. The video played on loop, her thin, wavering voice filling the space with a melody from 1943. Beside the video was a photograph of Hanako Yamamoto from 1941, a beautiful young woman with a violin, standing in front of the music school she'd owned in Seattle before the internment, before everything had been taken away. Theo stood looking at his great-grandmother's face, seeing Graham's features in her expression, seeing his own eyes looking back at him across 4 generations. She would have loved this, a voice said beside him. Theo turned to see an elderly Japanese woman, maybe 90 years old, using a walker to steady herself. "I'm sorry?" Theo said. "Hanako Yamamoto, your great-grandmother. I was one of her students in Minidoka. I was 8 years old when I learned Kaerimichi. I'm 93 now, and I've remembered that song my entire life. Even when I tried to forget everything else about the camp, that song stayed with me." She looked at the photograph. Hanako was magical. She could take children who were terrified and angry and make them sing. She told us that singing was how we would survive, that music was something they couldn't take from us, even when they took everything else. And she was right. The woman reached out and touched the photograph gently. Thank you for remembering her. Thank you for sharing her music. Too many of our stories have been lost. But not this one, not anymore. After she walked away, Theo stood alone in front of his great-grandmother's photograph, listening to his grandmother's voice hum the melody that connected them all. The way home. He pulled out his phone and called Lily, who was in Boston finishing her master's degree. The exhibition opened, he told her. It's beautiful. People are crying, they're remembering. Good, Lily said. That's what songs are for. To help us remember what we thought we'd forgotten. To carry us home when we don't know the way. After hanging up, Theo walked through the exhibition one more time, reading every story, listening to every song. Each one was a life. Each one was a memory preserved. Each one was a fragment of history that had almost disappeared but had been caught just in time. He thought about that first day in Graham's room when he'd heard her hum a melody he didn't recognize. How that single moment had changed everything, had given Lily her composition, had taught Theo his own history, had preserved a piece of music that might have been lost forever. One melody, 12 measures, 80 years of memory. And now it would live on, carried forward by new generations who would learn Kaerimichi and understand that home is not a place but a song, not a building but a memory, not something you can hold in your hands, but something you carry in your heart. The way home continues, the song said. Wasurerenai, never forgotten. And because of a teenage violinist playing in a nursing home courtyard, because of an elderly woman with Alzheimer's humming a half-remembered melody, because of people who cared enough to listen and preserve and share, that song had found its way home. And so had Theo, and so had Lily, and so, in a way, had Hanako Yamamoto, whose music had outlived her by 8 decades and would outlive them all. The songs we catch become the songs we pass on. And the music continues, always.